Ladies and gentlemen, it's wonderful to be here with everyone yet again. We're here for the next section, the next session, I guess I should say, of the Kentucky Court Interpreter Orientation. I am one of your presenters. My name is Joshua Elliott. I am the Executive Officer of the Office of Language Access. With me today is my incredibly talented co-presenter, Aymara Liste Gonzalez. She is the Operations Manager of the Office of Language Access. She and I work very closely together to just make sure that language access is as excellent as possible and as high quality as possible in Kentucky's courts. We do that all day, every day, and we're super excited to be here with you today, hopefully to help you initiate your journey toward certification and toward working with us in the courts. We need good people and we need competent interpreters, and that's why we believe that putting together this training in this recorded format was a good idea so that we can help people become interested in what we do and ultimately help people go through our process. So we're going through a series of presentations. You've probably seen a few of those presentations already. The next presentation in that series deals with administrative procedures and also our Kentucky certification process. Of course, we are a governmental entity. We have lots of paperwork. There are lots of rules and regulations. We need to talk about those things just a little bit before we get too far down the road of becoming certified. We also need to talk about what certification really is. Aymara and I have thrown around that term a little bit in some of the other presentations that we've done. You may understand that the goal is to become certified, but what does that really mean? What does that process entail? How do you actually become certified? What is that? So we're going to talk about that a little bit. We'll also talk about how interpreters get paid and how much they make, all that kind of good stuff. So we have some neat things on the horizon for today. What we're going to do, I'm going to turn it over to Aymara to get us started. She's going to talk a little bit about administrative procedures, sort of how our team works, how you get assignments, all that kind of thing. And then I will come back and we'll talk about the certification process in a little more detail. Okay, so let's go forward. As always, if you have questions throughout the presentation, write them down, of course, and keep them. Send us an email afterward. We will give you our email address, our addresses again after this presentation, as we always do. Reach out to us, please. Please send us messages, send it to both of us, and we will get back to you, and we will make sure that you have the information you need. Also, and we'll probably mention this a couple of times as we go forward, don't forget about the supplemental information that you've been given. We've given you access to an online shared folder with lots of materials, and specifically regarding administrative procedures, certification process, there's lots of documentation in there. So read through those things. We'll probably mention that again a time or two throughout today's presentation. Make sure to take a look at it. Important stuff in there for sure. All right, this is our website, by the way, at the bottom of the page that you see here. Take a look at that. A lot of good information there as well. Just a lot of neat stuff that will help you understand more about what we do. All right, so without further ado, let me turn it over to Aymara. Aymara, go ahead.
Thank you, Joshua, and hello again, everybody. So like Joshua said, we're going to give you a little bit of background as to what this AOC, this organization that we work for, is, and how we do things. For those of you who are already interpreters, the parts that we will cover regarding how to become certified may be familiar. Some of it is redundant because states do things similar to some extent. But for those of you that are new at it, you will really learn a lot about the process. So bear with us, those of you that already did it and that are watching this orientation for purposes of getting your certification through reciprocity, which is the term we use when somebody is already certified in another state and they just want to add Kentucky to the states in which they can practice interpretation. So the AOC, for short, the Administrative Office of the Courts, was established in 1976. It is staff for the Commonwealth's Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. It has a director's office and 10 departments. I think, is that still 10? Because I know there was a little bit of reorganization a year or so ago. But in any event, there are 10 departments, and we added some recently, a year or two ago, we added some internal accounting or internal auditing. That doesn't really affect interpreters much, except they are new to working with us, and some divisions have been created. But of course, we are part of that, the Office of Language Access. And according to the state constitution, the AOC has various duties under the supervision of the administrative director. So it is a fiscal agent for the Court of Justice. The staff at the AOC prepares the budget biannually and administers that budget. We are assigned, as one of the departments, we have a budget that covers our salaries and expenses as staff interpreters, as well as other things, including the money to pay freelancers that help us, because we really couldn't do this without you. There are 120 counties in Kentucky, 10 staff interpreters, and we really couldn't do this without your help as freelancers. They also have data processing systems for publishing statistical reports, evaluating projects, operating case management systems. They maintain supplies and equipment for the entire court system. So when somebody needs something, the AOC is the one that sends it to the courthouses, local facilities programs, they administer that, and they provide support for regional administration of trial courts, boards, and commissions. They also administer the personnel policies and payroll of the Court of Justice. So we have an employee manual, and essentially that's what it is, that comes from the AOC. It also supervises the state law library. It has educational programs for judges, for the court clerks, for support staff. We have an education department at the AOC, and they put together those annual meetings the judges have, where they discuss things that affect the legal system. And sometimes we get to go in front of the judges and present regarding interpretation and what we do as interpreters. And when there's changes on the rules that govern our program, we get to appear before the judges. And they also print manuals at the AOC, the forms, the stationery. A lot of the forms, or all the forms, or most of them, have been translated into many languages, Spanish being the first of them. I believe Arabic also. And I'm not sure if there's a third set, but we have all that on the website. I recommend, by the way, at least if you are a Spanish interpreter, that eventually you check on the Kentucky Court of Justice website, because the forms are accessible in Spanish, and that will give you familiarity with the way we use here, the words we use, and the way we say things here, an established format already, and it would help you prepare for the exams, and it would make things easier for you. And of course, the part that concerns us, the AOC oversees our office, the Office of Language Access. So there we go, to the part that interests you. Who can appoint an interpreter? We have a set of rules that were passed in 2017 called Administrative Procedures. We call them APs for short, but it's really a Supreme Court order. Those rules govern our program and give us the guidelines of how we do things. The person, or the so-called requesting or appointing authority, is a judge, a chief judge, the circuit court clerk, a Supreme Court clerk, a Court of Appeals, the AOC director, or somebody that they designate that determines there is a need for an interpreter, or authorizes the request for using an interpreter in court proceedings or during direct services. And those are two definitions that are important also for our purposes: court proceedings or direct services. Essentially what this says is that there are people in the court system, within the court system, that are authorized to request an interpreter. Not just anybody can do it, and we have a process for that. So who contacts the interpreter? There is a contact person. It's an individual in each county who is designated. It's generally a clerk of the court or a deputy clerk. Sometimes it is a judge's secretary. There is a lot of formality in this language here because it is a definition within a Supreme Court rule, and you can read that by yourselves on your own when you're looking at the presentation. But essentially, 3 or 4 years ago, they chose, or our program chose an online platform through which interpreters are requested. Each clerk has an account. They were taught how to use it, and they put in a request. They don't contact an interpreter directly. The request comes through our program. One of us receives that request, sends it out to interpreters, and when we get the response, who is available, who is not, we will make the assignment. So how are interpreters chosen? The AOC has an interpreter directory that we maintain. Anybody who is registered as an interpreter in Kentucky, whether it is spoken or sign language, and wants to be included in that directory, we put it there. The directory is available to the public also. So if an attorney in Kentucky is looking for an interpreter, they call our office, because even attorneys sometimes don't know that the directory exists. But we will always refer them to the directory that has your information, and they can contact you depending on which area they are. So this is important here at the bottom. You can be in the directory if you are admitted to be an interpreter in Kentucky, but to work for the court system per se, you must have a contract with the AOC. You can also be registered as an interpreter with the AOC, but you don't have to work for the AOC. You can choose to simply be admitted here and not have a contract with the AOC and make your services available to the general public or lawyers or somebody else who may need an interpreter. But the reality is that most interpreters that register with us do work for the court system. So more in depth here, you have to meet certain requirements. And as I was saying before, you can choose to be in the directory and not have a contract, but it lets you advertise your services to other entities. But to work for us, you have to comply with continuing education requirements. We've been talking a lot about this as a profession. It's a profession, and we have a code of professional responsibility. And like all professions, we also have continuing education requirements to make sure that we are always sharpening up our skills, that we don't become stagnant. So it is a requirement of 9 hours of interpreting training or education per year. 2 of these must be ethics related. Now, the reason it is per year is simply so that it matches the contract renewal process. In most places that I know of, the renewal requirement is 2 years, and technically speaking, ours is also 2, but just so that it matches the contract time so that everything jives, we have made it 9 years. It's a total of 18 every 2 years, but we have made a requirement that if an interpreter wants to renew their contract with the AOC, they need to have 9 hours of interpreting training courses, the continuing education for a year. So we have a program, an online portal that I was talking about. It's called Interpreter Intelligence. We created accounts 3 or 4 years ago. We have a very good technology savvy interpreter. Her name is Patricia Schumann, who taught people how to use the system, And she also solves little problems here and there when they come up. And through this portal, the clerk, the judge's assistant, the person designated at the court will make a request. One of us receives it, and that's how the process goes. We'll send a job offer out to interpreters, and you can accept it or reject it, and then we'll make a formal assignment of that job for a specific date. Something that I don't know if we covered before, the Commonwealth is divided into 5 or 6 regions that match the courts of appeal for purposes of interpreting. And we have what it's called a language access liaison. I like to refer to them as a regional manager. because they manage that region and they receive those requests from the clerks. They make the assignments later on. We have 2 interpreters, however, that manage the entire state for their specific line of work. One is our sign language interpreter, that is Ms. Kelly Sanchez, and the other is our languages other than Spanish interpreter, which is Ms. Alexandra Guite. And whether you are a sign language or a LOTS interpreter, you will be dealing with one of them. And if you're a Spanish interpreter, you will be dealing with the rest of the Spanish interpreters who assign interpreters. So basically, this is what I covered before. The process is we get the request, we send it out as a job offer, somebody accepts it. You have 24 business hours. We wait so that everybody has the same opportunity. We wait and we then make the assignment. Sometimes we, the staff interpreters, are available. And if we respond in less than 24 hours, obviously there is no need to wait because we take priority. Since we are hired to interpret for the court system and it is our job, obviously, if we can do it within our working day, there is no need to pay somebody else to do that. And there are no guarantees that a freelancer will get any assignments in any given month or in any given year. You know, obviously, you know that the last 13, 14 months have been rather difficult for everybody as freelancers. Things are coming back to normal with any luck. By the summer, things will really have cranked up. But for the last year, we were doing most of the work. Staff interpreters were really doing most of the work as, you know, the court work had really gone down considerably during the pandemic. So what proceedings are interpreted? A court proceeding, and this is a long definition, it's civil matter, criminal, domestic violence, juvenile, it's traffic, but it's something that happens in court, in the courtroom. It can be with the judge, it can be with a trial commissioner, a master commissioner, or it's also a court order proceeding in which somebody that works for the courts of justice is directly involved. Now, something that is important for our purposes, court proceeding doesn't include, and this is the easiest way to say it, something that doesn't involve the judge or somebody that works for the court system or for the courts of justice, meaning for the AOC. We do not interpret for attorneys, whether they are the public defender or private attorney. We do not interpret for people who do not work for court of justice entities. Those privileged communications, those confidential communications that should be protected by the fact that an attorney is talking to their client. As sworn proceedings interpreters, we do not get involved in those. And there are a couple of exceptions here and there for administrative matters. I don't know if they're within my purview of this little presentation or part of what Joshua will talk about later. There are exceptions, but in general, as sworn proceedings interpreters, we do not facilitate communications between an attorney and their client or the prosecutor and a witness. It's generally, as a rule of thumb, is for the person that is in court to communicate with the judge, the witness, because it's not always necessarily the defendant or a party. It could be a witness. So I don't want to say the defendant or a party. It could be somebody else, but it is inside the courtroom that this person is to communicate with the judge. Okay, so a better definition of court of justice, any office, operation, or program under the purview of the judicial branch. Now, the other thing that we interpret, the other process, is a direct service. This is something that happens out of court, but there is an court of justice entity that provides this service, and it makes it possible for this entity to carry out its duties and responsibilities according to a rule or a law of the court that mandates that service. And that is something else that we interpret. If you think back to the slide a few minutes ago that said we interpret direct services and court proceedings. So who's responsible for paying? The AOC is, and we pay what is called ordinary and reasonable expenses. We have a uniform payment rate, and expenses incurred in providing those services of language access provided by interpreters during court proceedings or direct services, the AOC will pay. There is a payment rate that establishes how much each interpreter in general, in categories, their categories will get paid. And based on that, you submit an invoice that we process, we check, we send it to accounting, and the AOC will reimburse you for those services. Now, this is important. If an interpreter, sworn proceedings interpreter, provides services that's beyond the scope of their role, even if it relates to a pending court case, the person or the agency requiring the services of the interpreter will be responsible for payment. So if you're stepping out of your role as sworn proceedings interpreters to help somebody else or doing something else or do something else, the other person, the other party, the other agency is responsible for paying you, not the AOC. You will be paid for the work you do for the AOC while you are on the clock for the AOC, but not for anything else. Once again, the AOC doesn't pay for interpreting services provided to an entity that is not part of the Court of Justice, even if the judge issues an order or refers a person to a certain program. If it is not a provider of the Court of Justice, the AOC doesn't pay for interpreting services for that. So based on that, who do the interpreters interpret for? Prosecutors, defense attorneys, family members of the limited English proficiency defendant, the victims, the judge, court personnel. What do you think? Well, think always, are we in court? Are we talking to the judge? Do you interpret for the prosecutor? Not really. You are interpreting for the person who is there who needs to communicate with the judge, and you are interpreting what the prosecutor is saying, but you're not really interpreting for the prosecutor. For the defense attorney, same rule. For a family member, well, is this person going to be a witness? Are they talking to the judge? But if the answer is no, then you don't interpret for them. Although there are some exceptions here also when it comes to minors, and it is parents of a minor that are present. You know, they are not necessarily a party per se, but you may be interpreting for a family member. Victims, well, again, is this victim going to be a witness? Then the answer is yes. The judge, of course. Court personnel, well, what are we doing here? Sometimes there is a case manager that may be conducting something on behalf of a judge. You know, those are nuances that you may have to call us to say, hey, this is the assignment says this, it says case worker. Is this okay or not? And we will help you determine. And the more you do it, the more you will learn and know the system, and you will know if it is okay or not. But when in doubt, always reach out to the liaison who assigned you the task. It's okay. Okay, and I'm going to pass it over to Joshua now to talk about the certification process.
Thank you, Imarta. And thank you for that excellent overview as well. Something key that she just said right at the very end, and I would agree with wholeheartedly, you get better at this as you do it. We know that there's a lot of information here. We've covered the things that you need to know going in. Maybe some of these things don't make sense quite yet. you don't quite know how to apply these things. You will get better as you go forward. You'll understand this more as you actually have to apply these rules and live by these rules as you're interpreting for us. So don't stress out too much if you didn't quite know exactly, what the entity is, or, who you can interpret for. It takes seasoned interpreters a long time to understand these things. And so hang with us, all right? So let's talk about Kentucky certification process. How do I become certified to interpret in judicial proceedings in Kentucky? We've talked a lot about certification. You hear certified interpreters. You know that that's your goal, but what does that mean really? What do you have to do to get there? What does that look like? Well, let's talk about it a little bit. By the end of this presentation, you're going to know. So first, I think we have to define what our interpreting classifications are in Kentucky. And we actually have 3 different categories or classifications for spoken language interpreters. Okay, so here I am referring specifically to the spoken language side of the business that we do. You can work with us in some form or capacity if you fall into one of these 3 categories, and each category has different requirements. So we have what are called provisional spoken language interpreters. Sometimes you'll hear them called provisional registered spoken language interpreters or provisionally registered, right? Provisional spoken language interpreters. We have registered spoken language interpreters, and then we have certified spoken language interpreters. Each of interpreters in each of those groups could interpret for us, again, in some form or fashion, but what they're able to provide may vary a little bit based on their classification, and the requirements for each of these classifications vary just a little bit. So let's talk about those requirements. So let's start with what we consider to be the lower form, the lower classification on that list. And again, they're the provisional interpreters. In order to be provisionally registered, provisionally approved to interpret in our proceedings, these are the steps. This is what you'd have to do, okay? So take the requisite examinations administered by the AOC and score as follows. And we're going to talk in more detail about these exams in a few slides, but the requisite exams are, there's an English proficiency examination. It's 135 questions. You got to get an 80%. And I'll tell you more about that in just a little bit, okay? You have to pass an oral proficiency exam. This is not the certification exam. We sometimes call this the oral proficiency interview, or OPI. But you have to pass one of these either in person or via telephone, depending upon language availability, to the satisfaction of the AOC, and we'll talk more about that in just a bit. And you also have to score between 55% and 64.9% cumulatively on the certification exam. So there's a separate actual oral certification exam designed to test court interpreters, right? And so in order to be provisionally registered, a provisional interpreter in Kentucky, those are the scores that you have to get. I mean, let that sink in for a moment. There's an oral certification exam you can score a 55% on and still be provisionally registered to interpret. 55%. Well, that means that you missed 45% of all of the answers, right? Of all of the content on there. That's a lot. So in your opinion, do these interpreters interpret a lot for us? No, they do not. They do not because preference always goes to the most certified interpreter, the interpreter with the highest qualifications available. And normally we have certified interpreters, right? Besides that, besides the test themselves, you have to have an acceptable criminal background report. To go into detail here just a moment, acceptable is somewhat, I would say, a subjective term. We do have some rules in place, but some of this is subject to the opinions and the preferences of the AOC, I would say. We, of course, vet our interpreters very closely, but it doesn't say you have to have a perfect background report. And so if we were checking your background and we found that there was something on there, it doesn't necessarily disqualify you immediately. It would just depend on what it is. We'd have to take a look at it, and we'd have to really see what our laws and rules state about it. What you cannot have on there is a conviction for a crime of moral turpitude. And that's actually a little bit hard to define, but in a nutshell, it just means that there was some type of lie, some type of fraud, some type of fraudulent action that you committed we wouldn't work with someone that way because we're talking about, you know, underlying dishonesty. That's probably the main thing. Obviously, crimes of violence, if they're on there, they may not even be crimes of moral turpitude. We wouldn't necessarily accept or approve somebody for work with the courts with something like that. But, you know, there's a wide range of things that could be on there that maybe would be acceptable. And every case is different. Everything is considered on a case-by-case basis. Let's just put out there, let's say you had a DUI, driving under the influence 10 years ago. You've been sober since, you made a bad mistake. You can show that you've had really good behavior since then. Maybe you've gone through classes. Maybe you've been involved in your community trying to advocate, you know, against driving under the influence. Well, that's not going to disqualify you. Sound like you learned your lesson. Probably would still be able to work with you. We did have one guy one time. He sent us an email. He's like, hey, I'd like to work for the Kentucky Court of Justice. I know a lot about the criminal justice system. In fact, I just finished serving a 22-year sentence for murder. Can I interpret for you guys? No. Okay, that guy was not approved to interpret for us, but there are crimes on there for which that we might still approve you case by case. Besides that, you have to attend the AOC orientation workshop, and these videos count for that requirement. So if in the end you finish all these videos, you will have completed that step towards certification. You have to obtain the hours of court observation or work as required by the AOC. We'll talk more about this in a few slides, but there are 24 court observation hours that you must fulfill before you can interpret. And we do those at different steps along the way towards certification. And then last, but certainly not least, read the Code of Professional Responsibility. That's our code of ethics. Also KRE 604. KRE means the Kentucky Rules of Evidence. And there's some rules related to interpreters, specifically Rule 604. And then KRS means Kentucky Revised Statute. Those are Kentucky laws related to interpreters. So you got to read all of that. And you got to sign an oath that says you will follow everything that's outlined there. All right. And the APs, as Armada said, APs means administrative procedures. Go through there. You have to follow those rules, right? There's an oath that's required through those administrative procedures. So that's how you become provisionally registered. Let's now go to the next classification, the next category, which would be registered interpreters. Everything here is the same. We're not going to go through it again. Everything's the same requirements. The only difference, notice the score on the certification exam. So before it was 55 to a 64.9, and now we have a 65 to a 69.9, okay, to be registered. So all the requirements are the same. Everything else would still be identical except for that score. So you scored a little bit higher on the certification exam. You still didn't pass. I mean, you could still miss up to 35% of all the content and interpret for us. Now, I will say registered interpreters at times do interpret for us. So you take the exam, maybe you speak a language that is hard to find, or maybe just our certified interpreters are busy. These interpreters sometimes do interpret. We don't allow them usually to interpret the full range of proceedings. We wouldn't throw you into a jury trial, probably. We would save those for certified interpreters, but at times we do have these interpreters interpret, okay? Let's go to the final category of classification, which are certified interpreters, okay? Certified interpreters, same thing, same qualifications, same requirements, except notice the score again. You have to get a 70 or above on each part of the certification exam in one sitting. So with the other classifications, provisional and registered, you had to get a specific score, and it was an aggregate score. It means it was a combination of all the scores on each section. And the certification exam generally has 3 sections that correspond to the 3 modes of interpreting. And we'll go into that in a bit more in just a few minutes. So maybe to be a registered interpreter, maybe you got a 90, and then you got a 70, and you got a 50. Well, if you average all those together, you would be in that registered score range, right? What this says for certified interpreters is that you have to get at least a 70 on each section, on each of those 3 sections at one sitting, right, at the same time. So you take the exam and you got a 75 and a 70 and an 82. Well, that's great, you're certified. But if you take the exam and you got a 99 and a 99 and a 69, your combined score would still be very high, be in the 80s, right? However, you would have failed the entire exam because you failed one of the sections. You didn't get a 70. You can't be certified. You got to be pretty good at all of them. Now, even to be certified, notice that you still miss 30% of the content and can be certified. The test is challenging. I don't want to try to trick you and make you feel like it's easy. It's a challenging exam. It's difficult to go in and score very highly on these exams because you don't know what the content's going to be. You're sort of cold, you're sort of nervous. There's a fatigue factor as well. And court interpreting, well, it's hard, right? So 70 is a good solid score. It's not an easy score to get. We feel that if you can do that, you're able to interpret in court proceedings. All the rest is the same, of course. Let's move forward here. For ASL, American Sign Language, we're talking about the sign language side of our business, very similar in terms of requirements. The difference is there is no state certification exam. So the state certification exam we use on the spoken language side, we call it the state exam, but it is a national level exam used by all states, or at least most states, the vast majority of states, to certify interpreters. It is a national exam, but it's for state court. That's why we call it the state exam. For ASL interpreters, there's actually no exact equivalent of the state exam. What they have is we give them licensure in Kentucky through the Kentucky Board of Interpreters. And to get that licensure, you have to have passed the national certification exam for ASL interpreters. That national exam is a generalist exam. It's not specifically focused towards court interpreting. So it authorizes you, it certifies you to interpret in general in different types of events, right? In different types of interactions, not specifically only court. And so it's their national level exam, sort of equivalent to what we have on the state level certification exam side for spoken language interpreters, right? So you do have to be nationally certified through what we call the Registry of Interpreters for the Deaf. They call it RID. You might hear them say that, RID, right? You might call it RID, but normally it's RID. There are also other certifying bodies or organizations. Potentially we could accept an equivalent, but almost always it's the test offered by RID. There's the criminal background check. There's the same orientation workshop, the observation hours, the same thing. And then the code of professional responsibility, everything's the same. It's just really the test itself obviously is a little different because it's just a little bit of a different animal, right? So who makes the exams? We understand there is an exam. There's a certification exam we've mentioned a few times. Well, who created that? Who made that? What are those about? Let's talk about it a little bit. There's something that's called Clack. And they like for us to refer to them as CLAC because it sounds nice and elegant, but we just call them Clack, which is sort of cool because it's something that like a chicken says, right? Clack, clack, clack. That's how we refer to these guys, but they're good people. It's what's known as the Council of Language Access Coordinators. And this is a national entity that exists under the umbrella of something called the National Center for State Courts, or as you see at the bottom there, the NCSC. So it's this department of the NCSC, if you will. And essentially, what has happened here is all of the member states, and now all 50 states and also U.S. territories, so beyond the 50 states as well, I would say, all 50 states have pooled resources, and they have developed and maintained and administered court interpreting exams. They do this to support state court interpreter certification programs and other language access services. So all these member states and territories have gotten together. They said, let's form a group. We're going to put money into the pot, and we can use that to develop exams and help courts become better in terms of offering language access, right? And so that's what's happened. And like I said, all 50 states are members. All United States territories are members. So you think about places like Guam and Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands and the U.S. Mariana Islands, all of these places as well. We all pool our money. Each member state is represented by a statewide coordinator responsible for the state's court language access service. In our case, in Kentucky's case, both Imarta and I can really serve in this capacity. Usually on a daily basis, I interact with these guys, but Imarta does that as well. So we work together to really interact and to do Kentucky's business through the Clack. The council's work is managed through projects of national interest in the area of language access and consists of coordinators, court administrators, and staff provided by the National Center for State Courts. So they've got specific people designated to assist us that are designated to language access there. We interact with them frequently, really good people, really just trying to make things better throughout the United States. And so these guys, they make the exams, and their mission statement is to inspire and enable its members to promote equal access to justice in courts and tribunals by eliminating language barriers for persons with limited English proficiency. That sounds nice and lofty. I mean, it really just means they're trying to make things better for people who require interpreting services in our courts. Here's their website. Take a look at them, at what they do through this link. Very interesting. They've got some good resources there as well for test preparation. I would recommend that you visit them. So in order to be a member of Clack, we won't go through this for too much detail, but I think it's important for you to realize you have to make a financial contribution. It's based on the number of non-English speakers that are estimated to be in your state. And so you could pay $50,000, you could pay $25,000, you could pay $15,000, sort of depends on where your state falls. I think Kentucky, I believe initially we fell in the second category there, greater than 100,000, but less than $1 million. And so $25,000, I believe that's what we paid. And then after that, you have to pay a yearly fee, membership fee along the way. It's 10% of that initial membership fee, which makes sense. So it's $2,500. So I think we pay that every 3 years, like $7,500 every 3 years. I believe that's how that works. You do have to have an official representative of the state to participate in Clack business, of course. Like I said, Marta and I do that quite a bit. And you have to agree to abide by test administration, rating, and security standards. So basically, we buy into the group, we give our money to pool resources, as we talked about, and in doing so, and in accepting to abide by their rules, administration, rating, security standards, we get to use their exams, right? And so those are the certification exams that you guys take on the spoken language side to become certified. The same exam that's used in Kentucky is generally used all across the nation. There are a few exceptions to that. Some states have developed their own exam, but they're very few, less than 5 states. So almost everyone who says they are certified as a Spanish interpreter, certified as an Arabic interpreter, has taken the same exam. It's the same standard. You know, again, we're trying to work to standardize the level of quality that that you can find in courts all across the United States. What are the advantages of being a member? Well, testing, that's the main one, right? I mean, we pay them, we get to use their tests. That's important, obviously. Let's read through this. This is good stuff. The core concept behind Clack is to establish court interpretation, test development, administration standards, and provide testing materials in order that individual states and jurisdictions may have the necessary tools and guidance to implement certification programs. And lo and behold, Kentucky does have its certification program, language access certification program. Part of that program is the orientation, which you guys are participating in right now. The purpose of that program is to recruit, train, and certify highly competent interpreters to serve our courts. And it's difficult because there's a lot of steps, as you guys have seen. And so out of every 100 people that come through the door, a few of those go through the process for different reasons. And we have to keep certifying people to meet the needs of our courts. And so we hope that you stick with it. We hope that you follow what it says here so we can get you certified and ultimately have you participate in judicial proceedings in our courts across the state. There are really 2 exams that we have to focus on. We're going to talk about both of them in a little bit of detail right now. There's the written exam, the Clack written exam, and then there's the Clack oral exam, okay? And Clack makes both of these exams, as we talked about, and sets standards for approving participants who have taken these exams and passing them or failing them, that kind of thing. So the first step is to pass the written exam. If you pass that, then after doing a few other things in Kentucky, you can set for the oral exam. In fact, the written exam is the next step for most of you after this orientation. So take note of what we're saying here. This is important information for you guys. The written test measures candidates' knowledge of 3 areas that are central to the work of a minimally qualified court interpreter. And you'll hear that quite a bit, that phrase, minimally qualified or minimally competent. People think when they pass this exam, or especially the oral certification exam, that that means that you are, you are the top of the top, you're the perfect interpreter, everything there is to know about court interpreting, and now you're ready to go. keep in mind that these exams are what we call threshold exams. So these exams are an opportunity for you to show that you have the minimum skills or that you are minimally qualified or competent to begin interpreting. When I took these exams, especially the oral exam, a long time ago now, I thought that it was the most difficult exam I'd ever taken at that time. It was really, really tough. I realized quickly after that, when I started interpreting in court, that exam actually was substantially easier than what we find in court. And since that time, you know, I've done a lot in court interpreting. I've taken other exams as well. I realized that really is just a threshold. It really is just a doorway that you have to go through in order to begin interpreting, but the real work begins after that. Now, this written exam is going to test you on English language skills. It'll test you on court-related terms and usage, and it will also test you on ethics and professional conduct. Those are the three areas of the written exam. So it's general English usage and competency, general English fluency, we might say, written English, court-related terms and usage. So just your knowledge of vocabulary used in court, how information flows in court. You guys remember the other presentation we did, the overview of the Kentucky judicial system. That kind of information is what you will find on the court-related terms and usage section of this exam. And then ethics and professional conduct. And we will cover ethics extensively in another presentation during this orientation that will give you the type of information that you need for this exam. Now, when you take this exam, you're given 2 hours and 15 minutes to complete the exam, so it is time. You come into Frankfurt. Right now, because of COVID, we are doing it on site in person. We only can have one person in there at a time. So after this orientation, I want you to reach out to us when you feel you're ready. We can schedule a time for you to come in. You come in, sit down, 2 hours, 15 minutes. We give you the exam. Bada bing, bada boom, you're good to go. You pass it. It's like that. All right. So the exam contains 135 multiple choice questions. It is all multiple choice. You have 4 choices on each question, right? A, B, C, or D. So by default, using the process of elimination, a lot of times you can find the right answer, even if you're not exactly sure of what that may be, or you at least have a good chance to guess at times. That's also a valid strategy at times. You need a score of 80 to pass. And so what that means is that you have to get at least 108 questions right out of the 135. If you get 108 right, you pass. If you get only 107 right, you fail. And there are people that are just right there on the border, all right? If you were to fail, you have to wait at least 6 months before retaking the exam. Those 6 months aren't meant to be punitive. It's not that we're trying to punish you. It's that if you don't pass it the first time, it's likely that you need to develop your English skills. And it's not something that can happen overnight. It does take time. It would take a very focused, conscientious effort on your part to improve in those areas. And so you just need a little bit of time. 6 months before you can retake the exam. There's no limit on the number of times you can take the written exam. So in theory, you could take it 6 months and 6 months, and you could do that for 20 years, I guess, right? Although practically speaking, after a few times, maybe it's not likely that you would pass. So there are 3 areas that they test you on, and those areas are broken into 2 parts. There's general language proficiency, which is the first half of the exam, questions 1 through 75. And then we have the court-related terms and ethics and professional conduct, questions 76 through 135. Let's take a little bit of a look in detail of how this is broken down exactly. So within that general language proficiency, you have different subsections that test you on different things. There's sentence completion. They give you, the first part of the sentence, and then based on your knowledge of the English language, you have to select the best option of the 4 choices, which would complete the sentence. There's synonyms in context. So they give you a word, and then they want you to pick out of the 4 choices, the word that is closest to that word, and they give you some context. So they use that word in a sentence so that you sort of know what they're talking about, and then you pick out a word that makes sense, that would be the same. Then there's just synonyms without context. They say, this is the word, tell me which other word of these 4 would be most similar. That's sort of difficult, right? It just means you got to know that word. You got to know that word and all the 4 words. That can be sort of challenging. There are antonyms, which is when you do the opposite thing. You choose the word that means the opposite of the word that they're showing you. And then there's idioms. Idioms are phrases, sayings, maybe proverbs. Something like, the bigger they are, the harder they fall. Steel sharpens steel. Iron sharpens iron. You know, you never know what's right around the corner. Every cloud has a silver lining, all that kind of stuff. These are idioms that we say. We understand what they mean, and you have to know the meaning of these and pick the right choice in terms of what that really means. Then we go to part 2, which is court-related terms and usage and ethics. We have sentence completion as well in this part. Court-related questions, they will ask you about concepts and terms, vocabulary used in court. You have to know the meaning. There's sequence questions. There's only a few of these, but they want to make sure that, again, you understand the flow of information in our judicial system, how something starts and what the process is in between and how it finishes. They want to make sure you can put things in the right order. Specifically, it's always good to know like the parts of a trial. So at a trial, you have jury selection, and then you have the jury instructions, and then you have opening statements, and then you have closing statements, and you have then deliberation and the verdict. So would you have known that those are the steps, that they should be in that order? Or would you maybe have messed up the order just a little bit? They'll test you on things like that. There's also professional conduct questions. So they will ask you specific protocol questions related to court interpreting. And then there's ethical scenarios. They'll give you a scenario, an ethical dilemma, and they'll ask you what the best resolution will be. Again, in terms of ethics, after the ethical presentation that is a part of this orientation, you should have a really good start, let's say. Maybe you're not completely prepared, but you have a really good understanding of the types of things that you might see. You have a really good foundation for answering those questions, I imagine. So how do you prepare for the written exam? Well, if you're not familiar with taking written multiple choice tests, you may find it beneficial to do a few different things. Number one, I would just review instructions and suggestions in general on taking multiple choice tests. Specifically, you might take a look at the Federal Court Interpreter Certification Exam, the written exam portion of that. So we'll talk about federal court certification in just a bit. But as part of that, they also have this 2-step process. There's a written exam and an oral exam, and they offer a written exam, a practice written exam to assist you in preparing. I would take a look at that. That could be very helpful, and they give some guidance there. You also could study preparation materials developed for other exams and maybe even take those other exams. For example, the TOEFL exam, which tests your English skills. Usually when students from foreign countries come to the US before they can study, they have to take the TOEFL, right, to demonstrate that they have a certain level of competency in English. This would be an excellent exam to study for, to practice. It would help you develop English skills and, give you some experience in taking multiple choice exams. Other suggestions, we'll just go through this very quickly. You go back and read this on your own. You might take English courses. You're going to read. In fact, I would say reading in general is the best way to become a competent interpreter. There's other things along the way as well, but reading a lot, reading in both languages, maybe especially your weaker language, very important. I would read a lot. When it says read widely, read a variety of different things. That's super important. Brush up on English vocabulary and lexical concepts. So go back to the basics, back to 2nd grade. Review what antonyms, synonyms, idioms are. Review some of the most common ones in those groups that you might come up against. Review sample tests from other interpreter certification programs. We talked about the Federal Court Interpreter Certification Exam. That's what FCICE means, Federal Court Interpreter Certification Exam. Study for those as well. Anything you do in that area will help you in the state exam. And you could also practice with SAT and GRE workbooks. These are college entrance exams. The SAT is for undergraduate studies. The GRE is for graduate studies. There are other exams as well that you could take, that you could look into as well. Taking those and studying for those would be a good way to prepare for the English exam. In terms of personal experience, what I can tell you with the written court interpreter exam, the state level exam, if you are a person who has been educated in the United States, a native English speaker, and you've gone to college in the United States, probably, you've grown up in this culture, you understand in general, maybe you're not an expert, but you understand how court works. Probably you could sit down, take that exam, and probably get a passing score, be okay. Now, that's not always the case. I've seen native college educated English speakers fail. I have, but it's not often, it's not frequent. Probably you're okay. If you are a speaker a native speaker of a foreign language, educated in another country, in another culture, and you have been here for less time, you didn't necessarily grow up here, you didn't go to school here, you could struggle with this exam quite a bit. This exam does require a bit of preparation. Take it seriously, prepare for the exam. Good things will happen if you understand, the format of the exam, you understand what to expect, you have a much better outcome. Let's talk a little bit about the oral certification exam, also made by Clack, of course. So it is oral. We sort of get the written stuff out of the way with that first exam. Once you pass that, we go to the oral exam. It's all oral. We administer the exam using pre-recorded scenarios. And so you put on headphones, similar to what I have on now, and you listen to pre-recorded sessions that simulate things that you might find in court, and you interpret out loud, and your interpretation is recorded as well, and that's what they test you on. Generally, it consists of the three parts, three modes, coincides with the three general modes of interpretation. So there are three parts to most exams. I say most because there are some abbreviated exams for some languages, but generally speaking, there are three parts that correspond to the three modes. Those three modes, we talked about it in another presentation. Do you remember what they are? Sight translation, consecutive interpretation, simultaneous interpretation, those three. So you have a section on each of those modes. You have to take all of the sections at the same time, and you got to pass them all with 70% on the same exam in one sitting. It takes about 45 minutes for the whole oral exam. When I describe this, some people, they usually tell me, man, I guess, as tough as it is, I guess you're just there all day. I guess you're just testing every possible thing and, just poking and prodding, and I guess we'll just be there for hours, right? No, actually not. About 45 minutes. You'd be surprised what you can mess up in just 45 minutes. It doesn't take long to figure it out if you can do it or not. So 45 minutes is all we need. And that's actually sort of challenging. When you interpret in court, if it's longer than 30 minutes, 45 minutes, you typically work with a partner. So there's some stamina here. Interpreting for 45 minutes straight, it's sort of tired. There's a fatigue factor that fits into this. 45 minutes to an hour is approaching sort of maximum limit of what a court interpreter should do. And so this is a good stamina test as well. You do have a couple of breaks along the way, very brief breaks between the modes, but about 45 minutes of interpreting. Now it's graded based on keywords or scoring units, as we call them. And it's graded by at least 2 language experts. Now, what this means is that not every word that you say is graded. That's important. So, for example, let's say that, like we talked about, you're listening to a recording. It's the simultaneous section, okay? And so what you're hearing in your ear is an English monologue. You have your headsets on, and what you're hearing is maybe an attorney speaking. Maybe it's like an opening statement. So, you're hearing things like, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I'm here today to talk to you about a very important issue, right? Going through this whole thing. And you hear that, and it's maybe 7 or 8 minutes long, something like that. The graders, they're not listening to that recording like you are. They're looking at all those words on a script. So they have the script of everything that's said, everything that you hear. They have it written out on a script, and they're following along with what you're interpreting on the script, and they're marking you correct or incorrect based on what you say. But they're not grading every word that you say. On that script, there are certain words that are highlighted or underlined, and only those words are being graded. So you think about a page, maybe there's 300 words on that page, but maybe out of those 300 words, maybe only 30 of them are actually underlined. Those are the things they're testing you on. So if you think about it, you could miss large portions of the actual exercise. You could do something really incorrect and still potentially get a high score or even a perfect score, assuming that you had correctly interpreted those keywords or scoring units. Now, the trick is that you never know what the keywords and scoring units are, right? Only the graders know that. You never know what they are. So you have to try to interpret everything correctly. But if you mess up a little bit, it's not the end of the world. There is room in this process for error. There's flexibility built in because it's understood that it's really hard to interpret. So keep that in mind. Even if you have a bad stretch on the test, it's not over. Just jump back in, focus, make it up, right? Maybe what you missed wasn't even scored anyway, or maybe you only lost a point or two. No big deal. Jump back in, right? Now, pass rates will vary from state to state, but nationally for the oral state certification exam, the pass rate's around 10%. I can say that the rate is much higher than that in states that generally have a very large, highly educated bilingual population. So I think about California, Texas, Florida, lots of bilinguals. They give lots of tests. By default, their average is a bit higher than that. By higher, maybe it's 18%, 20%, maybe they get lucky 25%. I doubt it. It's a hard exam. In Kentucky, we don't give the test that often, and we don't have as many bilinguals, right? We don't have a huge bilingual population, so our pass rate probably is 10%, but maybe even a little bit lower than that, just depending. Mostly that's because people don't prepare. They don't prepare appropriately. This exam is not impossible. If it had been, I couldn't have done it, Marta couldn't have done it, right? It's not impossible. It just requires preparation. It does require a high level of bilingualism, as we talked about in another presentation, but it also requires preparation. It's like any exam. Study hard, prepare, good things will happen to you if you do. So what languages are available? The downfall of this process that we've been talking about is that not all languages have a certification exam. So making a certification exam is expensive. It's time consuming. It's expensive to maintain the exam after it's made. So the decision of creating a new exam is not taken lightly. It's based on the volume of cases that we see across the nation. And so you may have one state where a specific exam would be great to have, a specific language, but maybe across the nation, there's very little need for, for that actual language, for an exam of that language. And so therefore an exam has not been made. One of the biggest complaints that states will typically voice is simply that there aren't exams in all the languages that we would like. I hope that they develop more exams. But for now, we have 18 that are ready to go. Here they are. Let's see, we've got Arabic, we've got Bosnian, Serbian, Croatian, Cantonese, Filipino, which is Tagalog, we've got French, Haitian Creole, Hmong, Ilocano, Khmer, Korean, Laotian, Mandarin, Polish, Portuguese, Russian, Spanish, Turkish, and Vietnamese. Right now, those are the exams that we have. Now, if you look to the right, most of them say full examination. That means, like we described before, that they have the 3 sections that correspond to the 3 modes, right? There are some, however, that are abbreviated. So you look at the Turkish, it's an abbreviated exam. What that means is that that exam would only offer 1 or 2 of the modes. You're still certified if you pass that exam, but you wouldn't actually take a full exam with the 3 sections, the 3 modes. There's only 1 or 2 of the modes present in that exam. Same thing for Bosnian, Serbian, Croatian. For Arabic, it's a little bit different. So sight and simultaneous are given in modern standard Arabic, whereas consecutive is given in Egyptian colloquial or Levantine colloquial. So you actually have to change dialects a little bit when you take that exam. Very interesting how that works. But these are the exams currently available. If you don't see your language on there, don't fret, okay? Don't be concerned. You can still work for us. You can't be certified because there is no certification exam. That doesn't mean that you can't make certified money. I want to clarify this because we negotiate with people who speak languages of lesser diffusion. We'll talk about that a little later in this presentation. So don't be concerned. Don't think that you're always going to be at provisional or registered, whatever the case may be. It just means that we can't say that you're certified because there is no certification exam, right? That doesn't necessarily relate directly to money that you may make. So to recap, here is our state certification process. Just to make sure we're on the same page. Attend an orientation workshop. Congratulations. If you get through all these videos, you're good to go there. Got to take the written exam, the English proficiency written exam. Got to score at least an 80. If you fail, you got to wait 6 months. That costs $50. All right, non-reversible. You pay me that money, that's it. It's gone. You never get it back, no matter if you fail or not. Okay. The next step for most of you is this English proficiency written exam. You should reach out to our office. You can send an email to Marta and to me afterwards. We can start you through the process of getting registered for that. You have to go to the AOC in Frankfort, Kentucky to do that. Then you got to pass an oral proficiency interview. We typically only require this for languages for which there's no certification. So as we just saw, there's only 18 certifiable languages. Other than those languages, you would have to take the oral proficiency interview. That's going to cost $139. Send us an email. We'll tell you how to schedule this. You actually schedule it on your own and you bring us the results afterwards. There are different categories, different scores that you can get from novice to intermediate, advanced, and superior. You have to get at least advanced in order to move forward in the certification process. If you fail it, you don't get an advanced, you got to take at least 90 days. And again, you're paying for it. So about 140 bucks a pop. It gets expensive. Pass it the first time. You have to complete 24 hours of court observation. We actually break that up. So you do 4 hours before the oral certification exam, and the remaining 20 hours you do after the oral certification exam. And then you got to pass the oral certification exam. So you have 1 year from the time that you're viewing these videos and finishing the orientation workshop to go through this process and take the exam. 1 year. If you didn't complete it in 1 year, theoretically, you have to go back and start the whole process again. You'd have to take the orientation, the written exam. We could potentially make exceptions. In COVID, it's really hard to do this kind of thing. Maybe we help you a little bit, make exceptions, but I want you to move forward within this 1 year and try to knock this out. That's plenty of time to get this done. You do have to get a 70% or higher in all 3 sections. You have to pass all sections in 1 sitting. If you fail 1 section, remember 99, 99, 69, you got to take the entire exam again. You can't just take it 1 section at a time. Some states allow that. Kentucky does not. If you passed the certification exam in another state, there's something called reciprocal certification. We'll talk about that in a moment, but you'd have to have passed the exam all at once, 1 sitting, 70%, right? So a few clarifications about the exam. As we mentioned before, if you didn't get it done within 1 year, you have to attend the orientation workshop again. There are a few exceptions regarding related to our certification process. Typically, you got to pass the certification exam in Kentucky, but there are a few things that we can talk about, a couple anyway. So there is federal certification, which we will mention in a moment. If you are federally certified already, and let's say you moved to Kentucky, then we would accept your federal certification in lieu of the oral certification exam, the state exam. You would go through a process here, and we call it reciprocity, but you would go through the reciprocity process. We would accept your federal certification. You wouldn't have to take the oral exam again. Or if you've passed the oral certification exam, the state exam in another state, you potentially could go through the reciprocity process as well. You have to meet all of Kentucky's requirements to do that. And like I said, other states have different scores, and they allow you maybe to take the exam and pass the sections in different settings. So maybe you passed only 2 that first setting, and you retook that 3rd mode at some point, you passed it. They consider you certified. Kentucky would not. You'd have to pass all 3 in 1 setting. But assuming you've met our requirements, we would accept your certification from another state. And most states have the same requirements that we have something similar most of the time. So keep that in mind. If you have one of these already, let us know, and we can work with you. And the process is pretty straightforward. We can give you reciprocal certification. We've mentioned federal certification. We're not going to go into a great amount of detail, but what I can tell you is that there are 2 different court systems in the U.S. So you have the state courts, right? That's what we're talking about with this orientation. I'm a state court employee, as is Imarta. Our certification exam authorizes you to interpret in state courts. But then on a national level, there's something called federal court. And federal courts, different court system, they deal with federal crimes. Those are different crimes many times than what we see in state court. They have their own certification program, their own certification process. 2 totally separate court systems with 2 totally separate processes. The thing is, many state court interpreters want to become federally certified. It opens up a lot of doors for you. You can interpret in state and federal court. Both Imarta and I are federally certified, and so we do work in federal court as well. In fact, I was a federal staff interpreter for close to 2 years in Miami, Florida. Fantastic work, really, really interesting work, great experience. You should absolutely strive to do this. This is considered to be the highest form of certification for judicial interpreters. It's respected all over the world because of the high standard. It's currently only available in Spanish. At one time, they offered it in Haitian Creole and Navajo. And there are still certified interpreters of Haitian Creole and Navajo. They still exist. There aren't many of them, but they're still out there. But that has not been offered since the early 80s, early to mid 80s. And since that time, it's only been offered in Spanish for the same reasons that we talked about on the state side. Creating these exams is expensive. And in federal court, approximately 96% of all in cases that require interpreters are Spanish cases. And so that's why there's only the Spanish exam right now. Like we do in state court, it's administered in 2 phases. However, they do it in alternating years. So in state court, you could take the written exam, and then, you know, whenever you're ready, a few months later, maybe you get to take the oral exam. Not with federal court. With federal court, you pass the written exam 1 year, and if you pass it, then you can sit for the oral exam the next year. So minimum, it's going to take you 2 years to get certified. But if you fail the written exam, you can't take that oral exam next year. You've got to wait 2 years to retake the written exam. And if you fail again, that's 2 more years to take the written exam. And then you pass, and you take the oral exam, and you fail. And then you wait 2 years to take the oral certification exam. So you see, it could be a long process. Preparation helps a lot. There are people who just give up on this process because, you know, you fail it a few times and 10 years go by, right? Don't give up on the process. Go forward. Prepare more than anything else. Prepare, practice. Make sure that you understand what the exam is about. The national pass rate for the Spanish federal certification exams around 5%. And really, it's a little bit deceiving, that number, because what that really means is it's 20% that usually pass the written exam. So for every 100 people that take it, 20 people generally pass. And then out of those 20 people that are qualified to sit for the oral exam that next year, usually 20% pass. And that's five people, right? And so out of the original 100 people that take the written exam, ultimately 5 of those people become federally certified. So it is 5% that pass the oral exam, but it's more like, you know, up front, it's a 20% here and it's 20% here for both exams. That's really how that works. Look into it. I gave you the link there. Some additional resources. Check out the link below for resources available through the National Center for State Courts. These resources are specifically designed for the state written and oral certification exams. There are other companies as well that offer practice exams that you can purchase. Off the top of my head, I would say there's the National Center for Interpretation that's through the University of Arizona. They offer some really great materials. Get on their website, look up NCI or National Center for Interpretation. They have some self-study materials they can help. Also, there's a company called Acebo, A-C-E-B as in boy O, Acebo. Look that up online, Acebo. That company creates materials, test prep materials for court interpreters. They've got some really good stuff, not only just in Spanish, but other languages as well. And like I said, the National Center for State Courts offers some materials as well. If you were to invest a few $100s in this process up front, you could probably get all the materials you would ever need. It would go a long way towards assisting you in your career. Do invest in yourself. Invest in this process. Invest in materials. You'll be glad you did. When I started approaching this career, when I started thinking about becoming a court interpreter, I spent a few $100s. I got lots of materials, and I practiced. I practiced a whole lot, and I still practice to this day. And that's what helps keep me sharp. It helps keep me motivated in the field, right? All right. We're going to turn it back over now to Armada, because we've talked a whole lot about administratively how it works to work for us. We've talked about how you become certified, but now what you really want to know is, how much am I going to get paid? Joshua, Armada, how much am I going to make? Let me turn it over to Armada. Go ahead, Armada.
That's right. And I was saying, Joshua, show me the money, or rather, let's show them the money. Earlier this year, actually, we worked on it the year before. We accomplished something that had been in the works for a while, and it means a lot to us. It means that Joshua got approval for a raise for certified spoken language interpreters. They used to get paid $42 an hour, but it is now $52. Now we're talking about state certified court interpreters. If you are federally certified, you get paid $65 an hour. That was not something that had any changes. It's been like that for as long as I can remember. Now, if you are a registered and provisional spoken language interpreter, then you get $27 an hour. What this means, keep in mind now that I'm going to refer to Spanish because that's that's what I do, and that's the one that I'm, of course, the most familiar with. But let's say you took the written exam, you passed it, you moved on to state oral exam certification exam, and you didn't pass it, but you did well enough that you're almost there. and you're a registered interpreter. Technically speaking, if you wanted to, we could offer you a contract. Now, you're not going to get all the offers. We are required, and we do offer the jobs to certified interpreters first. But if nobody else is available, you might receive a job offer. It will probably not be for the, felonies and things like that. It will be at the district court level, but there is a chance that you may receive an offer for work. And of course, we're talking again, this is for languages that are certified, things that are more established, languages of lesser diffusion, things that are more exotic. Of course, you may receive a higher rate. It depends. It's a market thing. It's a supply and demand type of situation. So, but these are the numbers: 52 for state certified, 65 for federally certified, which, like Joshua said, it's only for Spanish, and for registered, $27 an hour. Now, interpreters for the deaf and hard of hearing, they also received a rate. The ones that have these legal certification, those are, I look at them as the equivalent of a federally certified interpreter. They get paid $65 an hour. The ones that do not have that legal certification get paid $55 an hour. And as far as I can remember, we don't have that many legally certified interpreters in Kentucky. I believe there was 3 of them, 3 or 4, and one of them is Ms. Kelly Sanchez, our coordinator, our language access coordinator. Okay, so how does this work? For those of you who are already interpreters, you know that the standard in the industry, it's 2-hour minimum, regardless of whether the assignment was 2 hours or 15 minutes. In some states, they even have a 3-hour minimum. But for us, it's 2-hour minimum. So we gave you the assignment or the job offer, you accepted it, it's formal now, we're going to send you somewhere, or in some cases, it may be remote. You will get a 2-hour minimum. Now you have to be available for those entire 2 hours to receive the 2-hour minimum. And when you're done with the assignment, we'll always request that you let us know, because if there is something else that needs to be done or some other interpretation, there is a possibility that we may offer it to you, or that we may require that you assist with the matter. We pay travel time. We pay travel time at the same rate. So if you are going to another county, not within your county, if you're traveling, let's say from Jefferson to Shelby, we would pay you for travel time at the same rate as your interpreting rate. So you will get paid, if you're a federally certified interpreter, 65 hours for traveling and 65 hours for interpreting. However, we do not pay for parking or mileage reimbursement. And that the parking situation is not really a big deal here. We don't have that many courthouses that require parking in, complicated downtowns. As far as I can tell, there are many of our courthouses are in areas where parking is free. That's not a big deal, except in a couple of places. And we do not reimburse any other travel expenses incurred if it is in-state travel. Now, if your assignment is canceled with less than 24 hours notice, generally you will get paid for those 2 hours. But it will be based on the assignment type. It depends on the length of the assignment. You will be paid a little bit more if it was a longer assignment, but we also reserve the right to reassign you. So let's say, as I said before, if there is a hearing and tomorrow, Tuesday, and the cancellation comes to us today, we'll let you know, okay, it's canceled, but something else pops up, we reserve the right to reassign you. And you can see the economic reasons behind that. We're going to pay you for, cancellation. We might as well use you for something else because another court needs you. So that's the gist of it. Contact us with questions. You have our email addresses there. This is a lot of information. And in my experience, when we do the orientations, when you go through the process and you start sending your invoices, you will always have questions. It's okay. We have administrative staff in the main office that can help you with your invoices. If you have questions as to how you should bill, you can reach out to any of us. We will tell you about that. And we used to have, Joshua, a chart that explained the process flow of certification, which is probably still around there in the computer that I'm sure you're going to put it there with a package of things, because people are visual and, you know, you can look at it. But reach out to us with any questions and we'll be happy to guide you through the process. And like Joshua said, 3 things: preparation, preparation, preparation. This doesn't happen overnight. I can tell you that the first time I listened to myself on a practice test, it was terrible. And the only thing that makes you better is to practice. It's the only thing. In stamina for the exam, and you have to be comfortable taking tests. It will get you tired. There is no sense in telling you it will not. You have to be patient, because it may come to a point where you say, I just want this to be over. But it is about 45 minutes and you need to be well rested and you need to be prepared and give it your best. And if not, well, try again. But that's something else. Joshua, did you mention, I think you did, that in Kentucky, you can only take the test twice?
I don't know if we went over that or not. Let's make sure to mention that. In Kentucky, so you take the written exam. If you fail, there's a 6-month waiting period. And the written exam, there's no limitation on the amount of times you can take it. But then you get to the oral exam, so you're qualified to sit for it. And let's say you take it and you fail it the first time. So you wait 6 months. And let's say you fail it the second time. Technically, our rules outline that you can only take it twice ever. After the second time, that's it. Now, we do have the authority to approve additional settings of the exam if you're close. So let's say the first time you made a 55 and the second time you made a 65. And so you're moving in the right direction. You're very close to certification. We would probably approve a third time. If both times you made a 50 or 45, we probably would not approve the third time, because what happens is that studies have shown that it's very unlikely that someone will pass after the second time. If they haven't passed those first 2 times and they're far away from that passing score, something dramatic would have to happen. You would have to go to college. You'd have to get a degree. You'd have to study abroad for an extended period of time. You'd really have to improve to something that's fundamentally lacking there. So not allowing people to take it beyond the second time, it's again not meant to be punitive. It's meant to help people move on with life and not spend $200 every time you turn around. You take it 10 times, it's $200 a pop. I mean, you spent $2,000, right? Trying to get certified and never got it. So it's meant to help people. We would be flexible and give you a third time if it's likely that you would pass. But thank you so much, Armada, for the overview. Hope you guys have learned in this section what it means to work for the AOC, what it means to be certified and what those steps are, and of course, how you get paid and what that entails. Armada, any final closing thoughts before we finish for the day?
If I had to, somebody asked me about taking the exam, I would say don't do it until you are comfortable that you're going to do well enough, because it is expensive, especially, and don't do it when you have the pressure that you need to pass it. Do it when it doesn't matter that much to you. It matters, and I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean it as in it's not going to make me or break it. If I pass it, it will be wonderful, but I have some other comfort economically. I'm not putting all my eggs in that basket, because I have found that pressure also takes a toll on people, on their ability to relax for the exam and on the ability to do well. So that's the best I could tell you, in addition to preparation. It's not easy. It requires preparation, and it requires a calm state of mind when you're doing it.
Ladies and gentlemen, that's all we've got for today. We'll see you next time, next session. Keep going, come back, watch your videos. Send us an email if you have any questions. We are out of here. Take care.
Take care.